Billionaire CEO's perfect wedding is ruined when his ex storms in with the child he refused to claim. The little girl tugged at her mother's hand, her gray eyes fixed on the man kneeling before her in a $1,000 suit, surrounded by 300 shocked wedding guests. "Why didn't you want me?" The question hung in the air like a verdict. Edward Pierce, billionaire, empire builder, the man who had never lost a negotiation in his life, had no answer. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind him, his bride stood frozen in her Vera Wang gown, mascara beginning to run. Around them, phones were recording everything. The little girl waited. She was 5 years old, and she had spent her entire life wondering about this moment. Her mother had told her that her daddy lived far away, that he was very busy, that he sent his love from a distance. But children are not stupid. Children know when they are being lied to. "I asked you a question," the girl said, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that only children possess. "My teacher says it's rude not to answer questions." Edward felt something crack open in his chest. Not break. Crack. Like ice when spring comes, making room for something that had been frozen for far too long. "I was scared," he whispered. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could craft them into something more acceptable, more defensible. "I was scared of how much I might love you." The girl considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "My mama says being scared is okay." She tilted her head, studying him with those eyes that were exactly like his own. "Being mean about it isn't." 300 guests held their breath. The string quartet had stopped playing. Somewhere in the back, a woman was crying, and Edward Pierce, who had spent his entire adult life building walls so high that no one could ever hurt him again, finally understood that he had become exactly what he feared most. He had become his father. This is the story of a man who had everything except the courage to love, a woman who lost everything except her dignity, and a little girl in a purple dress who taught them both what actually matters. But before I tell you how this ends, I need to take you back to the beginning, back to a perfect wedding that was about to become a public nightmare, back to the moment when Edward Pierce thought he had finally won at life, not realizing that he had already lost everything that mattered. If you believe that people deserve second chances but only when they earn them, hit that like button right now. And if you have ever been on either side of this story, the one who ran or the one who was left behind, drop a comment. I read every single one. Now let me tell you about the day Edward Pierce's perfect life fell apart. The Napa Valley sunrise painted the vineyard in shades of gold and amber, the kind of morning that photographers dream about and wedding planners pray for. The Pierce estate sprawled across 300 acres of premium wine country, a $15 million monument to one man's success. Today, that monument would serve as the backdrop for the society wedding of the decade. Edward Pierce woke at 5:30, the same time he woke every morning, regardless of what day it was. His body had been trained for efficiency, not comfort. He reached for his phone before his eyes were fully open, scanning overnight market movements, checking emails from his Asian offices, reviewing the acquisition proposal that had been keeping his legal team busy for weeks. His wedding day, and his first thought was stock prices. He lay in the California king bed, alone despite having a fiancée in the estate somewhere, and felt nothing in particular about what was about to happen. This was not unusual. Edward had not felt anything in particular about most things for a very long time. Feelings were inefficient. Feelings led to poor decisions. Feelings had nearly destroyed him once, and he had vowed never to let that happen again. His phone buzzed with a text from his best man, though the term was generous. Richard Caldwell was his chief financial officer, not his friend. Edward did not have friends. He had associates, colleagues, and strategic relationships. Richard had been chosen for the role because he was reliable, presentable, and unlikely to give a speech that would embarrass anyone. The text read, "Big day. You ready?" Edward typed back, "Ready as I will ever be." He meant it literally. Readiness was a state of preparation, not emotion. He had prepared for this wedding the same way he prepared for any major transaction. Due diligence on Isabel's family, background checks on her previous relationships, financial modeling of their combined assets, a prenuptial agreement that had taken 4 lawyers 3 months to finalize. Everything was in order. Everything was optimized. Everything was exactly as it should be. He showered, shaved, and dressed in his custom Brioni suit, examining himself in the mirror with clinical detachment. At 42, he had aged well. The silver at his temples suggested gravitas rather than decline. His body remained lean from a personal trainer who came to his home gym 4 times a week. His skin showed the benefits of expensive skincare and a life free from the kind of stress that aged ordinary people. He looked successful because he was successful. He looked confident because confidence was a tool like any other, and he had learned to wield it expertly. What he did not look like was happy, but Edward had long ago decided that happiness was overrated, a temporary emotional state that people chased at the expense of more durable satisfactions like achievement, security, and control. He had all three in abundance. That was enough. That had to be enough. Across the estate, in the bridal suite that had been decorated with $10,000 worth of flowers, Isabelle Laurent was having her makeup done by a team of 3 professionals, while her mother supervised with the intensity of a general planning an invasion. Isabelle was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished and perfect and slightly impersonal. Her blonde hair would be swept into an elegant chignon. Her skin had been prepared for weeks with facials and treatments. Her body had been starved in exercise into submission for the dress that hung nearby, a creation of silk and lace that cost more than most people made in a year. She watched herself being transformed in the mirror and felt the same disconnection she always felt when looking at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a product, carefully manufactured over 34 years to be exactly what the market demanded. Educated at the right schools, connected to the right families, trained in the subtle arts of being valuable without being threatening. "Your father just arrived," her mother announced, checking her phone. "He brought the ambassador and his wife. Very good for the photos." Isabelle nodded without responding. Her father was Henry Laurent, media mogul, owner of newspapers and television stations and digital platforms across 3 continents. His presence at any event guaranteed coverage. His presence at his daughter's wedding guaranteed front-page coverage. This was not a wedding. This was a merger. Isabelle had understood this from the beginning, from the first carefully orchestrated meeting with Edward at a charity gala 3 years ago. She had known exactly what she was being offered and exactly what was being asked in return. A legitimate place in his world, access to his wealth and status, children eventually who would inherit both empires. In exchange, she would be perfect. She would not make demands. She would not create scenes. She would not ask for things he could not give, like love or passion or the kind of connection that made people do stupid things. It was a fair trade. It was a sensible trade. And if sometimes, late at night, Isabelle wondered what it would feel like to be wanted rather than acquired, she pushed those thoughts away with practiced efficiency. Wanting was for people who could not afford to plan. "He does not love you," her mother said matter-of-factly, adjusting a strand of Isabelle's hair. "You know that." "I know." "Good. Love is unstable. Love makes people vulnerable." Her mother's voice carried the weight of experience. Isabelle's father had loved her mother once, passionately, destructively. It had not ended well for anyone. "Security is better. You will have security. I will. And children. Soon." Her mother's eyes were calculating. His mother has made it clear that heirs are expected. Do not make them wait too long. Isabelle closed her eyes while a makeup artist applied her lipstick. She thought about children with Edward's gray eyes and her blonde hair. She thought about nurseries decorated by designers and nannies hired by agencies and a family that would look perfect in photographs. It would be enough. It had to be enough. The guests began arriving at 2 in the afternoon, a parade of wealth and influence that would have made the society pages weep with joy. Private jets had been landing at the nearby airstrip since morning. Limousines lined the estate's private road like a luxury car advertisement. Edward stood at the entrance of the main house, greeting arrivals with the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to simulate human connection without actually experiencing it. He shook, hands firmly. He made appropriate small talk. He accepted congratulations with humble gratitude that looked genuine because he had practiced it in the mirror. Inside, he was running calculations, networking opportunities at the reception, potential investors among the guests, business conversations that could be initiated under the cover of celebration. His mother appeared at his elbow, elegant and cold in ice blue Chanel. Victoria Pierce had raised her son alone after his father's departure, and she had raised him to be exactly what she needed him to be, an extension of her ambition, a vehicle for her revenge against a world that had once humiliated her. She looked at the arriving guests with satisfaction. "This is good," she said. The Hendersons came. I was not sure they would after that business with the oil rights. I smoothed things over, obviously. She adjusted his pocket square without asking permission. "You look acceptable. Try to smile more. You look like you are attending a funeral." Edward smiled on command. "Better?" "Marginally." She turned to greet another arriving couple with a warmth she never showed her son. "Marcus, Judith, how wonderful of you to come." Edward watched her perform and recognized himself in every gesture. She had taught him well. She had taught him that love was weakness, that vulnerability was dangerous, that the only safety lay in control. She had never told him that his father was still alive. She had let him believe the lie for 9 years before he discovered the truth himself. But that was ancient history. Edward did not dwell on ancient history. He did not dwell on anything that might require him to feel something he had spent decades learning not to feel. The ceremony was set for 5 o'clock, time to catch the golden hour light that would make the photographs spectacular. An altar had been constructed at the edge of the vineyard, framed by rolling hills and endless rows of grapevines. White chairs arranged in perfect rows. An aisle carpeted in ivory silk. Flowers everywhere, roses and peonies and delicate blooms whose names Edward did not know and did not care to learn. 300 guests took their seats as the string quartet began to play. Edward walked to the altar with Richard beside him, conscious of the cameras capturing every moment, aware that this footage would appear in magazines and news programs and social media feeds around the world. He stood at the altar and looked out at the assembled crowd. He saw business partners and potential clients. He saw old money and new money and the kind of people who bridged both worlds. He saw his mother in the front row watching with the satisfied expression of a general whose campaign was proceeding according to plan. What he did not see was anyone who actually knew him, anyone who had ever seen behind the mask, anyone who might have warned him that perfect plans have a way of falling apart when the universe decides to intervene. The music shifted. The guests rose, and Isabel appeared at the far end of the aisle, radiant and untouchable, a vision in white silk. Edward watched her approach and waited to feel something, anything, the way he had felt once, long ago, when a different woman had walked toward him across a crowded room. But that memory was dangerous, and he pushed it down hard, the way he had been pushing it down for 5 years. Today was not about the past. Today was about the future, a future carefully constructed to exclude anything that might require him to feel too deeply. Isabel reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Edward's with the solemnity of a man completing a business transaction, which, in a sense, he was. Edward looked into Isabel's eyes and saw nothing there that surprised him. She was as controlled as he was, as calculated, as empty. They were perfect for each other. That was the problem. The officiant began to speak, words about love and commitment that floated past Edward without landing. He had heard these words before, in movies and at other weddings, and in the imagination of a younger man who had once believed they might mean something. That man was gone. Edward had killed him slowly, over 5 years of denial and distraction, burying him under deals and acquisitions and the relentless accumulation of wealth. He barely listened as the officiant spoke about the sacred bond of marriage. He was already thinking about the reception, about the business associates he needed to connect with, about the deal that was waiting for his attention on Monday morning. And then the officiant said the words that would change everything. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The standard pause, the expected silence, a ceremonial moment that no one ever expected to be anything more than tradition. Edward felt a flicker of something, a premonition perhaps, a disturbance in the carefully controlled atmosphere of his life. He ignored it. He was good at ignoring things. The silence stretched for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then the doors at the back of the venue burst open with a crash that echoed across the vineyard like a gunshot. "I have a reason." Every head turned. 300 gasps filled the air like startled birds. The string quartet stopped mid-note, and Edward Pierce felt his blood freeze in his veins as he recognized the voice before he even saw the face. Brenda Holloway stood in the doorway, backlit by the golden California sunset, wearing a simple navy dress that probably cost less than the flowers on any single table. Her dark curls were wild around her face, her brown skin gleaming with determination and fury, and 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding its outlet. But it was not Brenda who stole Edward's breath. It was the child holding her hand. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with her mother's curls and her father's eyes. Those distinctive pale gray eyes that Edward saw every morning in the mirror. She wore a purple dress with butterflies embroidered on the skirt, and she looked at the assembled crowd with the kind of fearless curiosity that suggested she did not yet understand she was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of a $15 million wedding. Edward could not move, could not speak, could not breathe. She was here. After 5 years of pretending she did not exist, she was here. And she had brought his daughter. "What is this?" Isabel's voice came out sharp, all pretense of bridal grace evaporating in an instant. "Who is that woman?" Edward opened his mouth, but no words came out. His voice had abandoned him entirely, along with every script he had ever prepared for this moment. Because he had never prepared for this moment. He had never imagined she would come. He had built his entire life on the assumption that he could outrun his past forever. He had been wrong. Brenda walked down the aisle with measured steps, and the guests parted before her like the Red Sea parting for Moses. She held her daughter's hand firmly, her chin raised, her expression carrying 5 years of anger compressed into something diamond hard and absolutely unbreakable. She did not hurry. She did not falter. She walked with the confidence of someone who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to her and had emerged stronger for it. Edward watched her approach, and for the first time in years he felt genuine terror. Not the calculated concern of a businessman assessing risk, not the distant worry of a man reviewing his portfolio. Real, visceral, paralyzing terror. She was going to destroy him, and some part of him, buried deep beneath the walls and defenses and decades of careful construction, knew that he deserved it. The guests were recording everything now. Phones appeared from purses and pockets, capturing the destruction of Edward Pierce's perfect life in high definition. Tomorrow, this would be on every tabloid, every gossip blog, every social media platform in the world. The pristine narrative of Edward Pierce's perfect wedding was shattering in real time. Brenda reached the altar and stopped. She looked at Edward with an expression that contained multitudes, anger and grief and betrayal, and underneath it all, the faintest trace of the love she had once felt for him, transformed now into something harder and more dangerous. "Hello, Edward," she said. "Lovely wedding." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor underneath. 5 years of pain finally finding words. "Brenda," he managed. His voice came out strangled, unrecognizable. "Though I notice you forgot to invite your daughter." The word hit the crowd like a physical blow. "Daughter." Murmurs erupted. Someone gasped, loud enough to be heard across the vineyard. A woman in the third row actually stood up, as if she needed to get a better look at this disaster. Edward watched his carefully constructed life begin crumbling, and all he could focus on was the little girl's eyes. His eyes, staring up at him with innocent confusion. "Mama," the child whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Is that the man we came to see?" "Yes, baby." Brenda squeezed her daughter's hand without looking away from Edward. "That's him." He looked scared. Edward was scared. For the first time in years, he was absolutely terrified. Isabel stepped back from him like he was contagious. Her perfect face contorted with an emotion she had probably been trained never to show in public. Her carefully maintained composure was shattering along with everything else. "You have a child?" Her voice climbed higher with each word. "A child you never mentioned? In 3 years of dating? In 3 years of planning this wedding?" Edward's silence was its own confession. "Oh my God." Isabel's hand went to her mouth, then it dropped to her side, clenching into a fist. You knew, and you just pretended she did not exist." "It was not like that." "Then what was it like?" Isabel was screaming now, and she had probably never screamed in public in her entire life. "Explain it to me, Edward. Explain how you can stand there asking me to marry you while your daughter exists somewhere in the world, wondering why her father does not want her." He had no answer. The walls he had spent 5 years building, the defenses, the rationalizations, the carefully constructed narratives that made his choices seem reasonable, all of it crumbled in the face of a little girl in a purple butterfly dress. Grace tugged at her mother's hand. "Mama, why is everyone yelling?" Brenda crouched down to her daughter's level, her voice softening despite the chaos erupting around them. "Because sometimes adults make mistakes, and when those mistakes catch up to them, it is loud and confusing. But it is not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. Am I the mistake?" The question broke something in Edward that he had not known was still intact. Some part of him he had thought was dead, killed by his own hands 5 years ago when he had told Brenda to get rid of it. "No." The word came out before he could stop it. "You are not a mistake." Everyone went quiet. The guests, the wedding party, even Isabel froze mid-fury. All eyes turned to Edward, who had just spoken the first honest words of his adult life. Grace looked at him with solemn attention. Those gray eyes, his eyes, studying him like she was trying to decode a puzzle. Then why did you not want me? Now, I need to pause here, because what I am about to tell you changes everything about how you see Edward Pierce. But first, if this story is hitting different for you, if you have ever been abandoned or done the abandoning, if you have ever run from something that terrified you only to have it catch up to you later, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. This is not just entertainment. This is truth wrapped in story. And subscribe if you have not already, because what happens next will either restore your faith in human redemption or confirm everything you fear about people who hurt the ones they love. Now back to that altar, where a 5-year-old just asked the question no one else had the courage to ask. Edward dropped to his knees on the grass, ruining his $1,000 suit, putting himself at eye level with his daughter. For the first time in his life, he did not care about appearances. He did not care about the cameras or the guests or the spectacular collapse of his reputation happening in real time. He only cared about the little girl in front of him, asking the question he had been running from for 5 years. "I was scared," he said. The words came out raw and unrehearsed, nothing like the polished speeches he usually delivered. "I was scared of how much I might love you. I was scared of being a father, of being responsible for someone so important. So instead of being brave, I ran away." He paused, struggling to find words for feelings he had never allowed himself to have. That was wrong. That was cowardly. And I am so sorry. Grace studied his face with the penetrating attention that children bring to everything important. She was looking for something, some sign that would tell her whether to trust this stranger who shared her eyes. "My mama says being scared is okay," she said finally. "Being mean about it is not. Your mama is very wise. She is the best mama in the whole world." Grace's loyalty was fierce and immediate. "She works 2 jobs and still reads me stories every night. She never runs away from stuff, even when it is hard." Edward looked up at Brenda, really looked at her for the first time since she had walked through those doors. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the lines of strain that had not been there 5 years ago, the strength that had grown from having no choice but to grow strong. She had done what he had been too afraid to do. She had stayed. She had shown up. She had built a life for their daughter while he had been building empires and planning perfect weddings and pretending none of it was real. "I know," he said. "I know she is extraordinary. I knew it then too. I was just too afraid to deserve her." Brenda's expression flickered. Something complicated moved across her face, anger and grief and something that might have been understanding, though it was definitely not forgiveness. "This does not fix anything." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the cracks underneath. "Pretty words on your wedding day do not erase 5 years of absence." "I know. She cried for months when she was 3. Brenda's voice broke on the words, asking why she did not have a daddy like the other kids at preschool. "Do you know what that was like? Holding her while she sobbed and trying to explain something I did not understand myself. I cannot imagine. No, you cannot, because you were here, building your empire, planning your perfect life, while I was working overnight shifts and begging my mother to help with childcare and wondering if I would ever feel whole again." Edward absorbed each word like a blow. He deserved every one of them. He deserved far worse than words. Isabel's voice cut through the moment, cold now rather than hysterical. The shock had transformed into something harder, more permanent. "You should go. All 3 of you should go. This wedding is clearly over." Edward stood slowly, his knees protesting the hard ground. He turned to face the woman who was supposed to be his wife, the woman he had chosen precisely because she would never require him to feel anything real. "Isabel, I am sorry. I do not want your apology." Her voice dripped with contempt. "I want you to explain how I spent 3 years planning a future with a man who was hiding an entire child. A child he told to be gotten rid of." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Edward had not realized Brenda had shared that particular detail. But of course she had. Of course, the guests now knew the full extent of his monstrousness. "I cannot explain it," he said. "There is no explanation that makes it acceptable." "You are right. There is not." Isabel reached down and pulled the diamond engagement ring from her finger. It had cost $2 million. It meant nothing. She threw it at his chest. It bounced off and landed in the grass at Grace's feet. "Keep it or throw it in the vineyard or choke on it," Isabel said. I do not care. I am going to find my parents, fly back to New York, and pretend I never met you. She gathered her train with dignified fury and swept past him, her bridesmaids scurrying after her like confused ducklings unsure of how their perfect day had become a disaster. Edward watched her go and felt nothing but relief. The realization shocked him. He should feel something. Loss, regret, embarrassment at least. But watching Isabel leave, watching his perfect wedding collapse around him, he felt only the lifting of a weight he had not known he was carrying. He had never wanted to marry her. Not really. He had wanted to marry the idea of her, the safety she represented, the guarantee that he would never have to feel anything real again. But Real had just walked through the door holding his daughter's hand, and for the first time in 5 years, Edward Pierce could not hide from it. His mother appeared beside him, her face a mask of cold fury. I hope you understand what you have done. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of decades of control. You have humiliated this family in front of everyone who matters. Mother, do not mother me. She cut him off with a look that had been silencing him since childhood. I have spent my entire life building this family's reputation. Your father nearly destroyed it when he left. I rebuilt it. I made you into something worthy of respect, and you have thrown it all away for what? For a woman who was never appropriate and a child you were fool enough to create? Edward looked at his mother, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in his adult life. He saw the coldness he had always known was there, but he also saw beneath it something he had never noticed before. Fear. His mother was afraid. She was afraid of being abandoned again, of being humiliated again, of being left alone and exposed and vulnerable. She had passed that fear to him like an inheritance, and he had spent his whole life living by its rules. I am going to talk to them, he said, to Brenda and to my daughter. If you do, you are on your own. His mother's voice carried the weight of an ultimatum. I will not associate myself with this disaster. Edward felt something shift inside him, something old and heavy and long overdue for release. Then I am on my own, he said. He turned his back on his mother and walked toward Brenda and Grace, leaving Victoria Pierce standing alone at the altar of her son's ruined wedding. The crowd parted around him. Some people were still recording. Others were whispering furiously to each other. A few had the decency to look away. Edward did not care about any of them. He stopped in front of Brenda, leaving a respectful distance between them. Grace stood between her mother's legs, watching him with those serious gray eyes. Can we talk? He asked. Please, just talk. You had 5 years to talk. I know. I wasted them. I wasted everything. But I am asking now, and I know I do not deserve it, but please, give me the chance to hear about her, to learn who she is, to understand what I missed. Brenda hesitated. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, the part of her that wanted to walk away battling with the part that had always believed in second chances. She had believed in him once. He had destroyed that belief. But maybe, just maybe, some fragment of it remained. One conversation. Her voice was hard, but not as hard as before. For Grace's sake, not yours. She deserves to know her father, even if her father does not deserve to know her. Thank you. The words came out rough with emotion he did not know how to handle. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Brenda took Grace's hand and began walking toward the estate's guest house. You have a lot of explaining to do. And I have 5 years of questions. Edward followed, leaving behind the wreckage of his wedding, his reputation, and the life he had spent 42 years constructing. He did not look back. The guest house was a smaller version of the main estate, decorated with the same impeccable taste, the same expensive furnishings, the same soulless perfection. Brenda settled Grace at a small table with her phone, opening a coloring app that would keep her occupied while the adults talked. You can draw while Mama and the man talk, okay? His name is Edward, Grace said. Is he really my daddy? Yes, baby. He is. Grace considered this information with the seriousness it deserved. Then she nodded and turned her attention to the coloring app, her small fingers moving across the screen with practiced ease. Brenda straightened and faced Edward. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them charged with 5 years of history they had never resolved. Tell me about her, Edward said. Everything. Please. Brenda studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much he deserved to know. Then something in her seemed to release, a tension she had been holding for half a decade. She was born March 15th, Brenda began. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. The delivery was complicated. The cord was wrapped around her neck. Edward felt his stomach drop. She could have died. His daughter could have died, and he would not have known. They got it untangled in time, Brenda continued. But those first few minutes, when they rushed her away, and I could not hear her crying. She paused, the memory clearly still painful. I have never been so scared in my life. You were alone? My mother was there. My sister flew in from Atlanta. She met his eyes with a challenge in her gaze. The people who actually showed up were there. Edward absorbed the hit. He deserved it. What was she like? As a baby? Loud. Brenda's expression softened slightly. She had an opinion about everything from the first day. Cried when she was hungry, cried when she was tired, cried when she was bored. The only thing that would calm her down was being held. She wanted to be held constantly. I would have held her. The words came out before Edward could stop them. If I had been there, I would have held her. But you were not there. Brenda's voice was flat, not accusatory, just stating fact. So, I held her. For hours every night. Working on 3 hours of sleep, going back to work 6 weeks postpartum because I could not afford more time off, and still holding her every moment I was home because she needed to know someone was there. Edward closed his eyes. The image of Brenda, exhausted and alone, holding their crying daughter through endless nights. It was worse than anything he had imagined, and he had spent 5 years trying not to imagine it at all. She had asthma, Brenda continued. It showed up when she was 2. A bad attack in the middle of the night. I called 911 and rode in the ambulance with her, watching her struggle to breathe, not knowing if she was going to be okay. Edward's hands clenched at his sides. He had not known. Of course, he had not known. He had made sure not to know. She was fine, Brenda said, reading his expression. They got her stabilized. She uses an inhaler now, carries it everywhere. But that night in the emergency room, sitting there alone while they worked on her, I made myself a promise. What promise? That I would never let her feel as alone as I felt. Brenda's voice was fierce. That no matter what it took, no matter how hard I had to work, she would always know she was wanted. She would always know she was loved. The accusation in her words was unmistakable. He had made their daughter feel unwanted before she was even born. When did she start asking about me? Brenda sat down on the arm of a chair, exhaustion finally showing in the slump of her shoulders. Around 3, she started noticing that other kids had daddies. At first, she just asked questions. Where is my daddy? Why does he not live with us? Normal stuff. What did you tell her? That you lived far away. That you were very busy with your work. That you loved her but could not be here. You told her I loved her? What was I supposed to say? Brenda's voice cracked. That her father told me to get rid of her? That he wanted her to not exist? She was 3 years old, Edward. She did not deserve to know the truth. No. Edward's voice was rough. She did not. Grace looked up from her coloring. Mama, are you sad? Brenda forced a smile. A little bit, baby. But I am okay. Is it because of him? Grace pointed at Edward. Partly, Brenda admitted. We are talking about grown-up stuff. It is complicated. That is what grown-ups always say when they do not want to explain. Grace returned to her coloring with obvious disapproval. I am 5, not stupid. Despite everything, Edward felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. She was sharp. She was observant. She did not let adults get away with easy answers. She got that from you, he said quietly. Brenda looked at him with an expression he could not read. She got a lot of things from both of us. That is kind of how it works. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of lost years pressing down on both of them. Why now? Edward finally asked. Why did you come here today? Because she stopped believing my lies. Brenda glanced at Grace, who was absorbed in her artwork. About 6 months ago, she started pushing harder, asking more specific questions, wanting to see pictures of you. I did not have any pictures, Edward. I did not have anything to show her because you gave me nothing. I am sorry. Sorry does not help. Brenda's voice sharpened. Sorry does not explain to a 5-year-old why her father is a stranger. She told me a month ago that she did not believe me anymore. She said she knew I was lying about you loving her from far away. She said if her daddy really loved her, he would come see her. So you decided to bring her to me. I decided she deserved to know the truth. Whatever that truth was. Brenda's eyes met his. I found out about your wedding through the news. It was everywhere. Billionaire Edward Pierce to marry media heiress. The fairy tale wedding of the decade. The words were bitter in a way that told Edward exactly how much they had hurt her. And I thought, why should he get his perfect life while I am still explaining to our daughter why she does not have a father? Why should he pretend we do not exist while she cries herself to sleep, wondering what she did wrong? She did nothing wrong. I know that. Brenda's voice rose. But she does not know that. She thinks there must be something wrong with her, something that made you not want her. No matter how many times I tell her she is perfect, she still wonders. Edward felt the full weight of his choices crash down on him. 5 years of absence had not just hurt Brenda. It had wounded his daughter in ways that might never fully heal. What do you want me to do? He asked. Whatever it is, I will do it. Brenda laughed, but there was no humor in it. You do not get to just decide to fix this, Edward. You do not get to write a check or make a grand gesture and have everything be okay. This is not a business problem you can solve with resources. Then what is it? It is a child who needs to know her father. Brenda's voice softened. A little. Not because you deserve to know her, but because she deserves to know you. Even if you are terrible. Even if you disappoint her. She deserves to make that judgment for herself instead of spending her whole life wondering. Edward looked at Grace, still coloring, humming quietly to herself. She seemed unaware of the conversation happening around her, though he suspected she was taking in more than she let on. Can I try? He asked. Can I have the chance to be something to her? Whatever you will allow. Supervised visits, your terms, your timeline. I will do whatever it takes. Brenda was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 5 years of carrying everything alone. You do not understand what you are asking for. Fatherhood is not a part-time job. It is not something you do when it is convenient or when the mood strikes you. It is showing up every single day, even when you are tired, even when you do not want to, even when it is hard. I know. Do you? Because 5 years ago, you chose convenient. You chose easy. You chose to walk away rather than do the hard work of being present. What is different now? It was a fair question. Edward had been asking himself the same thing since Brenda walked through those doors. I do not know, he admitted. I do not know if I am different. I know I want to be. I know I am tired of the life I have been living. The emptiness of it. I know that when I saw her, when I saw Grace, something broke open in me that I have been keeping sealed for a very long time. Pretty words. I know. And I know my words mean nothing after what I did to you. But I am asking for the chance to prove them with actions. One supervised visit. If I mess it up, if I do not show up the way I should, you never have to see me again. But if I do show up, if I prove I can be consistent, then we talk about what comes next. Brenda studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like she was looking past all his defenses to the scared, broken man underneath. One visit, she said finally. In Portland, where we live, I will be there the entire time. If you do anything, say anything, that makes me uncomfortable, we leave immediately. I understand. And you do not get to buy your way in. No expensive gifts, no grand gestures designed to impress her. If you want to connect with her, you do it through time and attention, not money. Agreed. Grace looked up from her coloring. Mama, I am hungry. Brenda checked her phone. It was past 7. The wedding that was supposed to be happening was supposed to be followed by a reception with gourmet food and champagne and dancing. Instead, they were sitting in a guest house, surrounded by the wreckage of Edward's life. We should go, Brenda said, standing. We have a long drive back to the airport. Let me get you dinner first, Edward said quickly. Please, just dinner. After that, you can go. Brenda hesitated, looking at Grace's hopeful face. Please, Mama. Grace had clearly picked up on the negotiation happening. I am really hungry. Fine. Brenda's agreement was grudging. Dinner. That is it. They ended up at a small restaurant in downtown Napa, a casual Italian place far from the glamour of the vineyard estate. Edward watched Brenda help Grace order, watched her cut up pasta into manageable pieces, watched her wipe sauce from their daughter's chin with practiced ease. These were the moments he had missed. 5 years of ordinary moments that added up to a life. What do you do? Edward asked, trying to make conversation that was not weighted with history. For work, I mean. I am an architect. Brenda's voice carried a hint of pride. I have my own firm now. Small, but growing. We specialize in sustainable design. That is incredible. I did not need your validation to know that. But she softened slightly. It took a long time to build. A lot of years of working for other people, proving myself, saving money. I started the firm 2 years ago. And Grace? During all that, my mother watched her when I worked. My sister helped when she could. I built a community of people who showed up. She looked at him pointedly. That is what you do when you do not have money to throw at problems. Edward accepted the rebuke silently. Grace, meanwhile, had finished her pasta and was now drawing on her paper placemat with the crayons the restaurant had provided. She drew with focused intensity, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Edward asked, the endearment coming out before he could stop it. Grace looked up at him with those devastating gray eyes. "My family," she said. "See, there is Mama." She pointed to a figure with wild curly hair. "And there is Grandma, and Aunt Keisha, and this is me." Edward looked at the drawing. There were 4 figures, all holding hands. But there was space on the paper, room for one more. "Is that everyone?" he asked carefully. Grace considered the question with 5-year-old seriousness. "For now. Maybe I will add more people later. If they stay." The words hit Edward harder than any accusation Brenda had made. If they stay. A 5-year-old, hedging her bets, unwilling to commit to the idea that anyone new in her life might be permanent. Because why would she? Her father had already proven that people could leave, could choose not to exist in her life. "I would like to stay," Edward said quietly, "if you will let me." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she slid the box of crayons across the table toward him. "You can draw too," she said, "if you want." It was not forgiveness. It was not even acceptance, really. But it was an opening, a crack in the door. Edward picked up a purple crayon and began to draw. The drive to the airport was quiet. Grace fell asleep in her car seat within minutes, exhausted from the emotional weight of a day she did not fully understand. Brenda kept her eyes on the road, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Edward had offered to arrange a private car, a flight on his jet, anything to make their journey easier. Brenda had refused everything. She had spent 5 years accepting nothing from him, and she was not about to start now. "When can I see her again?" Edward asked as they pulled into the rental car return. "I will call you." Brenda's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Once we are home and settled, once I have had time to think about how this should work, I meant what I said. Whatever terms you set, I will follow them." Brenda turned off the engine and sat for a moment, staring straight ahead. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she asked quietly. "It was not the pregnancy. It was not the delivery or the sleepless nights or the financial stress. The hardest part was loving her so completely and knowing that you did not want her to exist." She turned to face him, and in the dim light of the parking garage, he could see tears on her cheeks. "Every time I looked at her, I saw you. Your eyes, your expressions, even the way she tilts her head when she is thinking. And I loved every part of her, including the parts that came from you. But I also had to live with the knowledge that you would have erased her if you could have. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." Brenda wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "But being wrong does not undo the damage. It just means you finally see it." She got out of the car and began unbuckling Grace from her car seat. Edward watched, wanting to help, knowing he had not earned the right. Grace stirred as Brenda lifted her. "Mama, we are at the airport, baby. Time to go home. Is he coming with us?" Brenda hesitated, looking at Edward over the roof of the car. "Not this time." Grace's sleepy eyes found Edward's face. "Bye," she said simply. Then she tucked her head against her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes again. It was such a small thing, a single word from a tired child. But Edward felt it in his chest like a promise. "Bye," he said softly. "I will see you soon." Brenda nodded once, then turned and walked toward the terminal. Edward watched until they disappeared through the automatic doors. Then he stood alone in a parking garage, surrounded by the wreckage of his life, and made himself a vow. He would not be his father. He would not disappear. He would not choose easy over meaningful. For the first time in 5 years, Edward Pierce was going to do the hard thing. The flight back to New York felt different than every other flight Edward had taken. Usually he worked the entire time, reviewing documents, sending emails, maximizing every minute. Tonight he sat in the dark cabin of his private jet and did nothing. He thought about his father. William Pierce had left when Edward was 7 years old. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. One morning he was there, and the next morning he was gone. Edward's mother had told him that his father had died. A car accident, she said. Tragic, sudden, nothing anyone could have done. Edward had grieved. He'd cried for months, missing his father with the desperate intensity only a child can feel. He had kept his father's watch under his pillow, had talked to his photograph before bed, had prayed every night that somehow the accident had been a mistake and his daddy would come back. He found out the truth when he was 16. A schoolmate had shown him a magazine article. William Pierce, formerly of New York, now running a successful business in Seattle. There was a photograph. William with his new wife, his new children, his new life. He had not died. He had just left. Edward had confronted his mother that night. She had not apologized for the lie. She had not seemed to understand why he was upset. I told you what you needed to hear, she had said. The truth would have destroyed you. The truth did destroy him. Just more slowly. Edward had spent the next 25 years building walls so high that no one could ever leave him again. Because if no one got close, no one could disappear. If he never loved anything completely, he could never lose it completely. And then Brenda had appeared. She had walked into a design meeting and challenged his vision for a building. She had been right, and he had hated that she was right, and he had also been fascinated. Here was someone who did not treat him like a prize to be won or a boss to be pleased. She treated him like a person with bad ideas that needed correcting. Their relationship had been unlike anything Edward had experienced. Brenda demanded honesty. She called him out when he was being evasive. She asked questions he did not want to answer and refused to accept deflection. For 8 months, he had let himself feel things. Real things. He had imagined a future that was not about empires and acquisitions. He had started to believe that maybe his father's abandonment had not broken him permanently. And then she had told him she was pregnant. Edward closed his eyes against the memory, but it came anyway. Brenda's face, bright with hope and fear. Her hands on her stomach, which was still flat, still showing nothing. Her voice, careful and soft, as she told him they were going to have a baby. And his response, get rid of it. Or do not, but do not expect anything from me. I never wanted this. The words had come from somewhere deep and dark, somewhere he had not known existed. The moment they left his mouth, he knew they were monstrous. But he could not take them back. He had seen his father in himself. The potential to love something so much that losing it would destroy him. The potential to be responsible for another human being who could be taken away at any moment. So he had done what his father had done. He had run first, but his father had run from a family that already existed. Edward had run from one that had not even had the chance to form. Which one of them was worse? The jet landed in New York at 3 a.m. Edward's driver was waiting, but Edward waved him off. He needed to walk. He needed to feel the cold night air and the empty streets and the weight of everything he had done. He walked for hours. Through Times Square, empty except for tourists and insomniacs. Down to the financial district, past the building where his company was headquartered. All the way to Battery Park, where he sat on a bench and watched the sun rise over the harbor. His phone had been buzzing constantly. Messages from board members, from lawyers, from PR consultants. The news of his ruined wedding was everywhere. Stock prices were already dropping. The narrative was brutal. Billionaire CEO's secret love child crashes wedding. Edward Pierce accused of abandoning pregnant girlfriend. The fall of a titan. Edward read the headlines without feeling them. What did any of it matter? Stock prices, reputation, the opinions of people who did not know him at all. His daughter was in Portland, waking up in a home he had never seen, wondering if the stranger with her eyes would actually keep his promise. That was what mattered. He called his assistant at 7. Clear my schedule for the next month. Sir, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. The situation requires. Clear my schedule. All of it. I will handle the board, but after that, I am taking leave. There was a pause. Sir, is everything all right? Edward almost laughed. Nothing had been all right for 5 years. Maybe longer. I need to handle some personal matters, he said. Things I should have handled a long time ago. He went to the board meeting that afternoon. The faces around the table were grim, worried, calculating. They had invested their careers in Edward Pierce, and now they were wondering if that investment had been a mistake. Gentlemen, Edward began, I am sure you have all seen the news. Murmurs of agreement. Someone cleared their throat uncomfortably. I am not going to spin what happened. I am not going to hire a PR firm to manage the narrative. Edward looked around the table at men he had known for decades. What you saw at my wedding was true. I have a daughter. I abandoned her mother before she was born. I spent 5 years pretending they did not exist. Edward, one of the board members interrupted. Perhaps we should discuss how to control this situation. I am not interested in controlling it. Edward's voice was firm. I am interested in making it right, which is why I am taking a leave of absence, effective immediately. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, objections piled on objections. The stock price, the investors, the pending acquisition. The company could not survive this kind of instability. Edward let them talk. When they finally quieted, he spoke again. I have spent 42 years building this company. I have sacrificed everything for it. My relationships, my health, my humanity. And in the end, what do I have? He looked around the table. I have an empire, and I have a 5-year-old daughter who does not know if I will keep my promise to see her again. If I have to choose between the two, I choose her. The silence that followed was complete. Richard, Edward said, addressing his CFO, you will serve as acting CEO during my leave. The transition documents are already prepared. If the board requires my permanent resignation to stabilize the situation, I will provide it. He stood. Gentlemen, I have a lot of work to do. Not business work. The work of becoming someone my daughter can be proud of. If you will excuse me, he walked out of the boardroom and did not look back. Before I continue with what happened next, I need to pause and talk directly to you. We have come a long way in this story. We have seen Edward Pierce at his worst, abandoning the woman he loved and the child he was too afraid to claim. We have seen Brenda Holloway at her strongest, building a life from nothing while carrying the weight of single motherhood. And we have seen Grace, a 5-year-old girl who just wants to know why her daddy did not want her. Now comes the part that will determine everything. Can Edward actually change? Can a man who spent his whole life running from love learn to stay? I am not going to tell you the answer yet, but I will tell you this. What happens next will either restore your faith in human redemption or confirm every doubt you have ever had about people who hurt the ones they love. If this story is resonating with you, if you have ever wondered whether someone who hurt you could actually change, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible, but only when they are earned through action, not words. Now let me tell you what Edward Pierce did to earn his. The first thing he did was find a therapist. Not just any therapist. He researched for days, looking for someone who specialized in family dynamics, childhood trauma, and the psychological patterns that lead people to repeat their parents' mistakes. Dr. Amara Williams had an office in Midtown Manhattan and a waiting list 6 months long. Edward called and explained his situation. She agreed to see him the next day. Tell me why you are here, she said at that first session. Edward sat in a leather chair that was probably designed to be comfortable but felt like a witness stand. Because I abandoned my daughter before she was born, and I want to understand why. Dr. Williams nodded, her expression neutral. Do you think you know why? I was scared. Edward's voice caught. I was terrified of loving something I could lose. So I rejected her before she could reject me. That is a good start. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly. But fear like that does not come from nowhere. Where did it start? And so Edward began to talk. About his father, about the abandonment, about the lie his mother had told, about the photograph in the magazine, the new wife and new children, the realization that he had been replaced without a second thought. He talked about the walls he had built, the relationships he had sabotaged, the women he had kept at arm's length because closeness meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant potential destruction. He talked about Brenda, how she had broken through every defense, how he had loved her with a completeness that terrified him, how her pregnancy had felt like a threat rather than a gift. You saw your father in yourself, Dr. Williams observed. You were afraid of becoming him, and I became him anyway. Edward's voice was bitter. I did exactly what he did. I ran. There is one significant difference. Dr. Williams set down her notepad. You came back. Edward looked at her. I do not know if that matters. It might not. Your daughter may never forgive you. Her mother may never trust you again. But the fact that you are here, doing this work, suggests that you are not your father. He never came back. He never tried to understand what he had done. You are trying. She handed him a card. I am going to give you homework. Every day, I want you to write a letter to Grace. Not to send. Not yet. Just to write. Tell her about your day. Tell her what you are learning about yourself. Tell her what kind of father you want to be. Why? Because you need to learn to be consistent. To show up every day, even when no one is watching. If you cannot be consistent in something this simple, you will never be consistent in her life. Edward took the card. He started writing that night. Dear Grace, the first letter began. Today I went to see a doctor who helps people understand their feelings. I am not very good at feelings, but I want to learn because I want to be a better father to you. The letters became a ritual. Every night, before bed, he wrote to his daughter. Sometimes the letters were long, processing the things he had discovered in therapy. Sometimes they were short, just a few lines about what he had eaten for dinner or what the weather was like. But he wrote every single day. 30 days became 60. 60 became 90. He kept every letter in a box, waiting for the day when Grace might want to read them. Meanwhile, he started making other changes. He sold his penthouse in Manhattan. The place was enormous, cold, designed to impress rather than to live in. He had bought it because it was the kind of home a billionaire was supposed to have. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. He moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn. 3 bedrooms, because he wanted one for Grace if she ever stayed with him. He decorated it himself badly, with furniture that was comfortable rather than expensive. He bought a purple bedspread for what he thought of as Grace's room, because Brenda had mentioned that purple was her favorite color. He restructured his involvement in the company. The board had not asked for his resignation, mostly because the stock price stabilized after Richard took over day-to-day operations. Edward remained chairman, attending monthly meetings but no longer running the daily operations. For the first time in 20 years, he had time. He did not know what to do with it at first. His entire identity had been built around work. Without the constant distraction of deals and acquisitions, he was forced to sit with himself, to feel things he had been avoiding for decades. Some days were bad. Some days the grief and shame were so overwhelming that he could barely get out of bed. He would lie there thinking about all the moments he had missed. Grace's first word, her first step, her first day of school. The years of bedtime stories and birthday parties and ordinary Tuesdays that he could never get back. On those days, Dr. Williams's voice would echo in his mind. You cannot change the past. You can only change what comes next. So he got out of bed. He wrote his letter. He went to therapy. He did the work. Brenda called him 6 weeks after the wedding. He was in his Brooklyn apartment, attempting to cook dinner from a recipe he had found online. The pasta was overcooked and the sauce was burned, but he was trying. That was the point. To try. His phone rang, and her name appeared on the screen and his heart stopped. Hello? It is Brenda. Her voice was careful, giving nothing away. I have been thinking about what you said, about supervised visits. Edward set down the wooden spoon he was holding. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. I have conditions. Name them. The visits happen in Portland, at places I choose. I will be present the entire time. You do not get to take her anywhere alone until I am confident you can be trusted. Agreed. No expensive gifts. No trying to buy her affection. If you want to connect with her, you do it through time and presence. Agreed. And if at any point I feel like this is not working, if you show any sign of being unreliable or inconsistent, we are done. No second chances after this second chance. Edward closed his eyes. Agreed. There was a pause. Then Brenda's voice, softer now. She asks about you. Every day since we got home. She wants to know when the man with her eyes is going to visit. Edward felt tears on his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. Tell her soon. Tell her I'm coming as soon as she will have me. Next Saturday, 10 in the morning. There is a park near our house. I will send you the address. I will be there. Another pause. Edward. Brenda's voice carried a warning. Do not make me regret this. I will not. He hung up the phone and stood in his kitchen surrounded by the smell of burned tomato sauce. Then he went to his desk and wrote his letter to Grace. Dear Grace, today your mother called me. She said you ask about me every day. I do not know how to explain what that means to me. I have spent my whole life being afraid of love, but I am not afraid anymore. I am coming to see you on Saturday. I promise I will be there. I promise I will keep showing up. I promise I am going to be the father you deserve. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, Portland living up to its reputation. Edward had flown in the night before, checking into a modest hotel near the park Brenda had specified. He had barely slept, too anxious about what the morning would bring. He arrived at the park 30 minutes early and sat on a bench, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by. His knee bounced with nervous energy. His hands would not stay still. At exactly 10 o'clock, he saw them. Brenda walked toward him with Grace holding her hand. Grace was wearing a yellow raincoat and purple rubber boots. She was looking around the park with curious attention, her eyes scanning until they landed on Edward. "Mama," she said loudly. "There he is, the man with my eyes." Edward stood as they approached. He did not know what to do with his hands, so he shoved them in his pockets. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rough. "Hi." Grace looked up at him with that solemn assessment he was beginning to recognize. "You came. I said I would. My mama said you might not. She said sometimes people say things and do not do them." Edward glanced at Brenda, who met his gaze steadily. She was not apologizing for preparing their daughter for disappointment. She had every reason to expect it. "I understand why she said that." Edward crouched down to Grace's level. "I have not been very good at keeping promises before, but I am going to try to be better." Grace considered this. "Okay." She pointed at the playground. "Can we go on the swings? If your mom says it is okay." Brenda nodded, and Grace took off running toward the playground. Edward started to follow, but Brenda caught his arm. "I will be right there on that bench." Her voice was low. "Watching. I understand. Do not mess this up." "I will try not to." She let go of his arm, and Edward walked toward the playground, where his daughter was already climbing onto a swing. "Push me?" Grace asked. Edward positioned himself behind the swing. He had never pushed a child on a swing before. He did not know how hard to push or how high was too high. He started gentle, barely moving the swing at all. "Higher," Grace commanded. He pushed a little harder. "Higher." He pushed harder still, and Grace's laughter rang out across the playground. It was the most beautiful sound Edward had ever heard. They swung for 20 minutes. Then Grace wanted to go down the slide. Then she wanted to climb the structure. Then she wanted to collect interesting rocks from the edge of the playground. Edward did all of it. He caught her at the bottom of the slide. He stood nearby while she climbed, ready to catch her if she fell. He helped her find rocks that sparkled in the gray light. "This one is purple," Grace announced, holding up a small stone with quartz veins running through it. "Purple is the best color." "I have heard that. Do you have a favorite color?" Edward thought about it. He had never really considered the question. Colors were just colors. "I do not think I do," he admitted. "But I like purple, especially now." Grace smiled at him. It was the first real smile she had given him, not cautious or assessing, but genuinely happy. "You can keep this one." She pressed the purple rock into his hand. "So you remember today." Edward closed his fingers around the stone. He would remember today for the rest of his life. He did not need a rock for that, but he would treasure it anyway. The visit lasted 2 hours. By the end, Grace was tired and hungry, and Brenda announced it was time to go home for lunch. "Can he come?" Grace asked. "Not today, baby. Another time." Grace looked at Edward with those gray eyes. "Are you going to come back?" "Yes." Edward's voice was firm. "I am going to come back every chance I get." "Promise?" "I promise." Grace nodded, apparently satisfied. Then she surprised him by stepping forward and wrapping her small arms around his legs in a hug. "Bye," she said. "See you soon." Edward froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of his daughter's arms around him. Then he crouched down and hugged her back, carefully, like she was made of glass. "See you soon," he managed. Brenda watched this exchange with an expression he could not read. Then she took Grace's hand and began walking toward the parking lot. Edward stood in the playground, holding a purple rock, watching them go. It was the smallest beginning. A 2-hour visit with a 5-year-old he barely knew. But it was a beginning, and this time he was not going to run. The visits continued, every other week at first, then every week as Brenda's trust slowly grew. Edward flew to Portland so often that he started keeping clothes at the hotel. Then he rented an apartment so he would have a proper place to stay. Brenda noticed. "You have an apartment now," she observed during one visit, 3 months in. It seemed practical. Edward helped Grace arrange the rocks she had collected into a pattern. I am here so often. That is a lot of commitment for someone who used to run from commitment. I told you I was trying to change. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. Do you want to have dinner with us tonight? At our house? Edward looked up sharply. Really? Grace has been asking. She wants to show you her room. She paused. And I suppose I am curious to see if you can handle real life, not just playground visits. I would like that. Edward's voice was careful, not wanting to seem too eager. If you are comfortable with it. I am not comfortable with any of this. Brenda's honesty was bracing, but I am trying to do what is best for Grace, and she wants you in her life. So I am trying. That night, Edward saw where his daughter lived for the first time. The house was small but well maintained, a craftsman bungalow with a front porch and a tiny backyard. The living room was filled with Grace's artwork, proudly displayed on every available surface. The kitchen was cozy, with a table that seated 3. Grace gave him the full tour, dragging him from room to room with proprietary pride. This is Mama's room. This is the bathroom. And this is my room. Her room was, as expected, explosively purple. Purple walls, purple bedspread, purple curtains. Stuffed animals crowded the bed, most of them dragons or dinosaurs. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, on her nightstand. This is where I sleep, Grace announced. And this is where I do my drawings. And this is where I keep my rock collection. She showed him a box filled with the rocks they had collected together over the past few months. The purple one he had given her was in the center of the arrangement. I kept it safe, she said. See? I see. Edward's voice was thick. That is a very important rock. It is. Because you gave it to me. They had dinner together, the 3 of them around that small kitchen table. Brenda had made spaghetti, Grace's favorite. Edward ate 2 helpings, even though he was not particularly hungry, because Grace was watching to see if he liked her mama's cooking. It is good, right? Grace said. Mama is the best cook. It is very good. After dinner, Grace insisted on showing Edward her bedtime routine. Pajamas, teeth brushing, 3 stories, and then lights out with her dragon nightlight glowing in the corner. Will you read me a story? She asked Edward. He looked at Brenda for permission. She hesitated, then nodded. Edward picked up a book from the stack by Grace's bed. It was a story about a dragon who was afraid to fly, who had to learn to be brave. He read it aloud, stumbling a little over the voices, not quite sure how to make it entertaining. But Grace listened with rapt attention, and when he finished, she said, You are not as good as Mama at the voices, but you will get better. I will practice. Edward promised. Good. Grace yawned. Good night, Daddy. The word hit him like a physical blow. She had never called him that before. Always the man with my eyes, or Edward, or sometimes just him. But tonight, tucked into her purple bed surrounded by dragons, she had called him Daddy. Good night, sweetheart. His voice cracked on the words. Sleep well. He stood in the doorway for a moment after she closed her eyes, watching her breathe. This small person he had created, who he had almost missed entirely, this miracle he had been too afraid to claim. He would never make that mistake again. Downstairs, Brenda was cleaning up the kitchen. Edward picked up a dish towel and started drying without asking. She called me Daddy, he said quietly. I know. I heard. Is that okay? Brenda paused her scrubbing. Is it okay that my daughter called her father Daddy? Yes, Edward. It is okay. I just meant I did not want to assume anything. Brenda set down the sponge and turned to face him. She looked tired in the kitchen light, tired and beautiful and so much stronger than he had ever given her credit for. You have been showing up, she said, consistently, for 3 months. You have not missed a single visit. You have not made excuses or canceled or let her down. That is more than I expected. It is the bare minimum, Edward said. It is what I should have been doing all along. Yes, it is. But the point is that you are doing it now. Brenda picked up the sponge again. Grace is happy. She talks about you constantly. She asks when you are coming back before you have even left. I talk about her constantly too. I write to her every night. Brenda looked at him sharply. What do you mean, you write to her? Letters. Edward felt suddenly self-conscious. My therapist suggested it. I write her a letter every night, telling her about my day, what I am learning about myself, what kind of father I want to be. I have not sent them. I was not sure if that would be appropriate. Brenda stared at him. Every night since the day after the wedding. I have not missed a single one. Something shifted in Brenda's expression, something that looked almost like belief. Can I read them? They are private. I wrote them for her. I meant, can I read them to decide if they are appropriate for her to have? Edward hesitated. The letters were raw, vulnerable. They contained things he had never told anyone. Fears and regrets and hopes that he had barely admitted to himself. But Brenda was Grace's mother. She had earned the right to vet anything that came into their daughter's life. Yes, he said finally. You can read them. He brought the box of letters the next time he visited. Brenda took them without comment and said she would look at them when she had time. A week later, she called him. I read them, she said. Her voice sounded strange, thick with emotion. All of them. And there was a long pause. I did not think you were capable of this, she finally said. Of being this honest, this vulnerable. The man I knew 5 years ago would never have written these things. I am not that man anymore. Edward's voice was quiet. At least I am trying not to be. I know. She paused again. Grace can have them. I think she should have them. Someday, when she is older, she can read them and understand what you were doing during this time. The work you were putting in. Thank you. Do not thank me. Thank whoever convinced you to start writing them. My therapist, Dr. Williams. Then thank her, because these letters are the first thing that has made me believe you might actually be different. Edward hung up the phone and sat in his Portland apartment, looking out at the gray sky. 6 months ago, he had been standing at an altar about to marry a woman he did not love, hiding from the existence of his own daughter. Now he was building a relationship with that daughter, letter by letter, visit by visit, moment by moment. It was not enough. It would never be enough to make up for what he had missed. But it was something, and for the first time in his life, Edward Pierce believed that something could become everything if he just kept showing up. A year passed. Then another. Grace turned 6, then 7. Edward was there for both birthdays. The first one, he was still just a regular guest, carefully maintaining appropriate distance. The second one, he helped Brenda plan the party, bought decorations, blew up balloons, and stood beside her while Grace made her wish and blew out the candles. They had developed a rhythm by then. Edward spent 3 weeks of every month in Portland, working remotely from his apartment. He had breakfast with Grace every Saturday, picked her up from school on Wednesdays, and had dinner with her and Brenda at least twice a week. He learned the rhythms of Grace's life. Her favorite teacher, the one who made math fun, her best friend, a girl named Maya who shared her obsession with purple, the boy in her class who had been mean to her until Grace told him exactly what she thought of him in front of everyone. She got that from you, Brenda said when she told him this story. The absolute refusal to tolerate disrespect. I was never that brave at her age. Maybe not, but you are brave now. That has to count for something. The relationship between Edward and Brenda had evolved too. Not into romance, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust still too fragile. But they had become something like partners, united in their dedication to Grace's happiness. They had hard conversations about the past, about the hurt, about what had broken between them, and whether it could ever be repaired. I loved you, Brenda told him one night, after Grace was asleep and they were sitting on her front porch, more than I had ever loved anyone. When you told me to get rid of her, it was not just about the pregnancy. It was about discovering that the person I loved did not exist. I know. I spent years wondering what I had missed, what signs I should have seen, how I could have been so wrong about someone. You were not wrong. Edward's voice was heavy with regret. The person you loved did exist. I was just too afraid to let him stay. I buried him under walls and defenses because being him was too dangerous. And now? Now I am trying to bring him back. Edward looked at her in the dim porch light. I do not know if I can be who I was then. Too much has changed, but I am trying to be someone better, someone worthy of Grace, someone worthy of you. Brenda was quiet for a long moment. I am not ready, she finally said. To try again, I mean. Maybe I will never be ready. What you did broke something in me that has not healed yet. I understand. But I want you to know that I see what you are doing, the work you are putting in, the man you are becoming, and I am grateful for it, even if I cannot forgive you yet. Edward nodded. That is more than I deserve. Yes, it is. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the Portland sky. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation, but it was understanding, and sometimes understanding was the first step toward everything else. Grace asked about it eventually. She was 7 by then, old enough to notice that her parents had a complicated relationship. "Mama, are you and Daddy ever going to get married?" Brenda nearly choked on her coffee. Where did that question come from? Maya's parents are married, and so are Lily's parents, but you and Daddy do not live together. "That is because your daddy and I have a special situation," Brenda said carefully. "We love you very much, but we are still figuring out how we feel about each other. Do you love him?" Brenda hesitated. The honest answer was complicated. Yes, some part of her still loved Edward, the part that remembered how he had made her feel before everything fell apart. But love was not enough to erase what he had done. Love was not the same as trust. "I care about him," she said finally, "and I think he is becoming a good father to you. The rest is still a work in progress." Grace considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. Then she nodded. "Okay, can I have more pancakes?" The conversation moved on, but Brenda thought about it for days afterward. Did she love him? Could she ever love him again? And even if she could, would it be wise? Edward had changed. She could not deny that. The man he was now bore little resemblance to the one who had told her to get rid of their child. He was present, consistent, emotionally available in ways she had never seen before. He did the work of therapy, the work of self-examination, the work of showing up day after day. But the scar tissue remained. Every time she looked at him, she remembered the moment he had rejected their daughter, the cold calculation in his eyes, the dismissiveness in his voice. Could she ever look at him without seeing that moment? She did not know, and until she knew, she could not move forward. The turning point came unexpectedly, as turning points often do. Grace got sick. A bad asthma attack in the middle of the night, the worst one she had had since she was 2. Brenda called 911, riding in the ambulance with Grace's small hand clutched in hers, watching her daughter struggle to breathe, feeling the same terror she had felt 5 years ago. But this time, when she texted Edward from the emergency room, he was there within 20 minutes. He burst through the doors, still in his pajamas, hair wild, face white with fear. "Where is she? Is she okay? What happened?" He was frantic, terrified, exactly like a father should be when his child was in danger. "She is stable," Brenda said. "They got her breathing under control. She is sleeping now." Edward's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the chair beside her, his head in his hands. "I was so scared," he whispered. "I saw your text and I could not breathe. The thought of losing her." Brenda looked at this man who had once been willing to pretend their daughter did not exist. Now he was falling apart at the thought of her being sick. People could change. She had believed that once, and then she had stopped believing it. But sitting in this hospital room, watching Edward tremble with fear for the daughter he had almost rejected, she started to believe it again. "She is going to be fine," Brenda said. "But she will need to stay overnight for observation. I am not leaving." Edward's voice was firm. "I am staying right here." And he did. All night, in the uncomfortable hospital chair, holding Grace's hand while she slept. He was there when she woke up, there when the doctors came to check on her, there when they finally discharged her the next afternoon. "Daddy stayed," Grace said as they drove home. "The whole time." "He did." "That is good." Grace's voice was drowsy, still recovering. "That is what daddies are supposed to do." "Yes." Brenda glanced at Edward in the passenger seat. His eyes were closed, exhausted from the sleepless night. "That is what daddies are supposed to do." Something had shifted. Something fundamental. A week later, Brenda invited Edward to stay for dinner after his usual visit with Grace. This was normal. What was not normal was what happened after Grace went to bed. "Can we talk?" Brenda asked. "In the living room?" They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a careful distance between them. But the distance felt different than it used to. Less like a barrier and more like a bridge that just needed to be crossed. "I have been thinking," Brenda began, "about the hospital, about how you showed up without hesitation, about how you stayed all night. I would not have been anywhere else." "I know. That is the point." She took a breath. 3 years ago, I would not have believed that. I would have assumed you would find an excuse, a business emergency, something more important. But you did not. Grace is the most important thing in my life. I know that now. I did not before. Brenda's voice was thick with emotion. But sitting in that hospital room, watching you hold her hand, I finally believed it. Edward waited, sensing that she had more to say. I am still scared, Brenda admitted. I am still angry sometimes. What you did left scars that have not fully healed. But I am also tired of protecting myself from something that might never happen. What do you mean? I mean that I have been waiting for you to let us down. For 3 years, I have been watching, waiting for the moment when you revert to who you used to be. And it has not happened. It will not happen. You cannot promise that. No. Edward's voice was honest. I cannot, but I can promise that I am committed to being better, every day, for the rest of my life. Brenda looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised them both. She moved closer to him on the couch. Not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. I want to try, she said. Slowly, carefully, with no guarantees. Try what? Being a family, a real family. Not just co-parents who are civil to each other, but people who are actually building something together. Edward felt his heart stop. Are you sure? No. Brenda laughed, a little shakily. I am not sure of anything, but I am tired of being sure. I am tired of protecting myself from possibilities. I want to find out what this could be. So do I. Edward's voice was barely above a whisper. I have wanted that since the day I walked away from you. I have just been too afraid to admit it. Then stop being afraid. Be brave, like our daughter. Edward looked at this woman who had every reason to shut him out forever, who had built a life without him, raised their daughter without him, proved that she did not need him at all. And yet she was here, offering him a chance he did not deserve. I love you, he said. The words came out before he could stop them. I have loved you since the first day you told me my building design was structurally unsound and aesthetically offensive. Brenda laughed again, this time with real warmth. It was. It really was. I know. You were right about everything. Then and now. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together. Two people who had been broken by each other, finding their way back. It was not a fairy tale ending. There was still work to do, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning was everything. The next morning, Grace came downstairs to find her parents making breakfast together. Edward was burning the pancakes while Brenda tried to rescue them. They were laughing. Grace stopped in the doorway, watching. Are you friends now? She asked. We are trying to be, Brenda said. Would that be okay with you? Grace considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, she decided, but I have conditions. Edward raised an eyebrow. Conditions? First, Daddy has to stop burning the pancakes. Second, I get to pick what we watch on movie nights. Third, if you get married, I want to be the flower girl and the ring bearer. That is a lot of conditions, Brenda said. I know my worth, Grace replied. She had learned that phrase from her mother and used it at every opportunity. Edward looked at his daughter, this fierce, funny, impossibly wise 7-year-old who had taught him more about love than he had learned in 42 years of living. Deal, he said. All conditions accepted. Grace nodded, satisfied. Then she climbed onto a stool at the kitchen counter. Good. Now can someone make me pancakes that are not burned? As Brenda took over the cooking and Edward set the table and Grace supervised both of them with commentary, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows. It was an ordinary moment. Ordinary and perfect. And Edward Pierce, who had spent his whole life running from ordinary, finally understood that ordinary was everything he had ever wanted. Dear Grace, he wrote in his letter that night, the 3,000th letter in a collection that had grown to fill several boxes. Today we had breakfast together, all 3 of us. You criticized my pancakes and demanded better ones, and your mother laughed, and I thought my heart might explode with happiness. I spent 42 years believing that happiness was something you achieved through success, that if I built a big enough empire, earned enough money, won enough deals, I would finally feel complete. I was wrong about everything. Happiness is not achievement. Happiness is this: a burned pancake, a small girl telling me I need to do better, her mother looking at me like maybe, just maybe, I am worth a second chance. Thank you for teaching me this. Thank you for being patient while I learned. Thank you for giving me Grace, which is also your name, which is also what saved me. I love you more than I know how to say. Your daddy. He put the letter in the box with all the others. Someday, when Grace was older, she would read them all. She would understand the journey her father had taken, from the man who rejected her before she was born to the man who showed up every single day because she was the most important thing in his life. She would know that change was possible, that mistakes did not have to be permanent, that love, real love, required courage and consistency and the willingness to keep trying even when you failed. And maybe, armed with that knowledge, she would go out into the world and build something beautiful. Something that he could never have imagined when he was standing at that altar, about to marry the wrong woman, hiding from the right one. That was the real legacy. Not the empire, not the money, not the success. The real legacy was this family, built from ruins, stronger for having been broken. The real legacy was Grace. Now, I want to speak directly to you one final time. We have come to the end of this journey. We have watched Edward Pierce transform from a man who abandoned his daughter to a man who would do anything for her. We have seen Brenda Holloway find the courage to trust again, and we have witnessed Grace, a little girl in a purple dress, teach both of her parents what love actually means. This story is not about perfection. It is not about people who never make mistakes. It is about what happens when you face your mistakes honestly and do the daily work of becoming better. Edward could not change the past. He could not undo the years he missed, the pain he caused, the words he spoke that almost erased his daughter from existence. But he could change what came next. And he did. That is the lesson of this story. Your worst moment does not have to be your defining moment, but only if you are willing to do the work. Not pretty words, not grand gestures. The actual boring daily work of showing up and trying and failing and trying again. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own choices and chances, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that redemption is possible. Drop a comment telling me your own story of second chances, whether you were the one who needed forgiveness or the one who needed to give it. And subscribe to Mr. Dalton's Story House for more stories that tell the truth about love, loss, and the messy work of becoming human. Hit that bell so you never miss a story, because this is what we do here. We tell stories that matter. Stories about real people facing impossible situations. Stories about the courage to change and the grace to forgive. This has been the story of a billionaire whose perfect wedding was ruined when his ex stormed in with the child he refused to claim. But it was also the story of a father who found his way home. Until next time, remember this: it is never too late to become who you should have been, but only if you start today.